Hello, I'm Minna Pakanen from Aarhus University, and I'm presenting a pictorial about crafting a leather self-tracking device for pollen allergies. I have written this with Kasper, Heiselberg, Broe, Nachtigall, Broe, and Krogh. The need for the design came from respiratory medicine researchers who have been trying to collect data on patients' allergy symptoms and medicine intake through a web questionnaire that has been prompted with a text message every day at 7 p.m. However, the response rates have been low, and the researchers tasked us with finding a new approach for assisting patients in self-tracking their allergy symptoms and medicine intake in a motivating and in an effortless manner, multiple times per day, also on the go. When designing the device, we needed to consider both patient and healthcare professionals' needs, meaning that the data collected by the patient with the self-tracker should be visualized first in an interpretative visual manner on a mobile application for the patient, and second in analytical and abstract presentation for the doctor and allergy researchers. The aim of this system is to help patients to understand their illness and learn to manage it by finding right medication patterns and places where they do not get symptoms. Analytical data is aimed to help allergy researchers and doctors form more informed diagnosis and develop better pollen medicine. The motivation for using leather as a material came from observation that current domestic healthcare devices rely on grayish-white plastic and steel look of hospital equipment or contemporary dark plastic and aluminium of smartphones and watches. This limits the user group of the devices, and the medical aesthetics can even stigmatize the user. In contrast, we believe that leather is warm, soft, and inviting material that enables domestic healthcare devices to be integrated into patients every day, as it fits better with the other items that user is wearing and carrying with. The leather is created by using tannins occurring naturally, such as tree bark and cranberries. Natural leathers continue to suntan as they change color under UV light exposure. They also absorb oils and display scratches with the use far easier than other leathers. All before mentioned made of vegetable leather to look and feel unique, and we believe that it also helps user to form an emotional attachment to it, as every scratch and mark stand for the particular experience. We initiated the shape exploration by looking for inspiration from pollen grains with various shapes, including triangle, globe, donut, oval, and coffee bean. The iterative ideation of the device was conducted through sketching, making physical mock-ups, and wet forming leather. The process ended up with 5 concepts, which features were combined into the final design. For example, 3 buttons for medicine intake, symptoms, and all okay with the click interaction, as well as multi-wearability and integration of the pillbox into the device. The pillbox was abandoned later due to the lack of space. In addition, we included automatic registration of the time and GPS location of the recording to be transformed into the application that also contains pollen forecasts. The wet forming of different shapes was conducted to explore how those would feel in hand. The oval shapes were perceived to be most pleasing and was decided the form to be proceeded with. We explored different approaches for making the buttons. We started by designing context-inspired pictograms and laser engraving them on the leather. The symptom button was inspired by pollen, medication button from a pill, and all okay from a circle. Even though we liked the look of these engraved buttons, they were difficult to recognize from each other in a blind use cases. We therefore carried on in exploring wet forming of the shapes. In this approach, we cut the pictograms from thinner leather and glued them under the main leather piece, and then, after wet forming into the final shape with mold, it resulted pictograms that show as convexes on the front side. However, in this case, it was even more challenging to distinguish 3 buttons from each other. Therefore, we simplified the button shapes into triangle, rounded edge square, and half circle. We also tried to make buttons to become more visible in the front side by forcing the leather down around the pictograms with plastic stick during the wet forming. However, the outcome was not visually satisfying. Next, we decided to use additional upper mold with holes shaped like the final buttons on top of the basic mold to make buttons appear more apparent in the front side, which led to visually more satisfying outcome. However, the extra leather pieces on the backside did not work well with the electronic switches. We therefore abandoned the gluing additional leather on the backside. To make buttons appear better on the front side without the extra pieces on the backside, we modified the inner mold by gluing button shapes on it. They were smaller than those in the upper mold layer to make room for the leather. These experiments ended up with distinctive buttons that work well with the electronic switches. However, we needed to enlarge the device as the electronics took more place, and we laser cut the final molds from acrylics. Next, there will be video of the wet forming of the leather cover. The leather is cut in the right size with the mold. 3.5 centimeters extra is added on the both ends of the upper mold for attachment straps. The leather piece is sunk in approximately 60 Celsius water for a couple of minutes to wet thoroughly. When no bubbles appear, then it's soaked thoroughly. The soaked leather piece is put in between the mold pieces and pushed in as tightly as possible. The mold is then flipped around and attached to the table with clamps and left to dry until the next day. The mold is opened when leather feels dry enough. The holes for stitching is punched with the leather hole punch tool and cylinder head hammer. The excess leather is cut away approximately 3.5 mm from the convex edge. 10 mm wide strap was left on both ends of the top cover. Attachment straps are thinned from the ends with leather skewer tool so that the sewing seam will not get too thick. Finally, a hole for the charger was made with a revolving punch plier and knife. In the meanwhile, the electronics was built by applying stacking principle. Lowest in the stack is the LiPo battery that provides enough power for 2 to 4 weeks of use in row. Above the battery is TTGO T7 ESP32 development board and a small coin vibrator for giving haptic feedback when pushing the buttons. The support structures are made of acrylics glued together with double-sided soft tape. The finished stack and its charging port are glued into their place in the back cover with hot melt adhesive. Next, there will be video of the sewing and finishing the device. Leather sewing yarn is taken 6.5 times the length of the stitching hole rim. Both ends of the yarn are threaded to sewing needles. The yarn is locked on each needle by pushing the needle 3 times through the yarn and pulling yarn through loops over the needle. Next, the electronic stack is glued inside of the leather covers with double-sided soft tape. Sewing is initiated by pulling the needle through both leather pieces until equal length of yarn is on both sides. The needle on the right or back side is pushed through to the next hole until a small loop of yarn is left on the right side. The needle waiting on the left side is pushed through the same hole until a similar loop of thread is left on the left side. The stitch is tightened while holding the device in between hands and pulling simultaneously the both yarns. This procedure is repeated until the rim of stitches is ready. To end the stitches, the needles are pulled again through the second to last stitch and then to the back side and yarn is cut short. The edge is made smooth by removing the excess leather with the sharp knife. The finishing of the edge is done by applying burnishing gum on it and polishing it with an edge polisher. Finally, an attachment ring was put into the attachment strap loop to make it possible to attach the device on clothes, keys or bag. Thank you for your attention, and we are happy to answer your questions if you have any.